And hello, this is Eamonn O'Brien, and you're so welcome to the Reluctance Speakers Club. And today we're going to talk about the kinds of things that leaders might need to consider to take a better vantage point on dealing with conflict in the work environment. And we have an awesome person who's going to help us on this topic all the way over in Canada. It is Faith Wood. Faith, hello.
Hi, how are you today?
I am just absolutely awesome. And for people who don't know you, Faith, of course, you are a behaviourist. You are the current president of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. You are somebody who is an expert in decoding behaviour and helping people to deal with conflict. And of course, you're an international keynote speaker, and you're just the perfect person to chat about this topic. So you're very welcome.
I'm very glad to be here. So thanks for asking me to be part of the show.
Oh, sure. Well, why don't we jump into where the trouble is?
I think the title of your business is probably right on the money. It's the reluctancy to face conflict. Conflict just makes people uncomfortable. They're afraid of the outcomes that are going to happen. They're afraid of offending someone. Often even employees in a workplace don't want to speak up to a manager or a leader who they see as being contributing to a problem for fear of losing their jobs. I mean, there's lots of reasons people are reluctant to get involved when there's conflict. Sadly, the longer you leave conflict alone, it's a bit like leaving fish on the counter. Yeah. And so after a couple of days, it kind of smells bad, and that smell lingers in the space.
No, I can appreciate that. And so for folks who are in a leadership position and you're faced with conflict, and so everybody knows there's an elephant in the room, maybe they haven't given it a name, but it's absolutely obvious that it's there, and it needs to be tackled because you can't let it fester. So for somebody who's in a leadership role, where do you start? You know, if you're simply looking at what you need to understand actually before you get going, what would be top of your list?
You know, top of my list, always when I go into an organization and talk about conflicts that have gotten out of control, is really looking at the players on the team. And I really look at human behaviors falling into two driving categories. One is that everyone needs to feel like they belong, that they've walked into a space and these are my people. And it is often the reason that people are reluctant to speak out if there's a problem, because they're, very afraid of being ousted. They would rather agree with something they disagree with than they would speak about being the opportunity to be ousted out of that group. The second piece is about significance. And so once we found a group that we feel like we really belong in, then we want to kind of jockey for position. And it's that jockeying for position of getting noticed, of being recognized, of being appreciated, that often contributes to conflict in a workplace. And it's where teams start to dissolve. It's where leaders have some challenges, both going upward in terms of communication and also down to the front line. And so we need to keep those two things in constant consideration. Then the next easiest way is I like to play the shampoo, rinse, repeat philosophy. Not 12 steps to fixing this, but really take a look at when I'm in conflict with somebody, if I can start to decode some of their behavioral preferences. And the way I kind of categorize that is to say, are they more social? In other words, is workplace, is their communication with you all about fun, connection, building relationships? Is that super important to them? Or are they more task-driven? And so if we take a look at task-driven people, we can say task-driven people kind of tip their hand, as it were. They tend to talk to you in terms of bullet points, one-word answers. If you ask them how their day is, the answer is usually fine, good, productive, busy, tired, all of those kinds of words.
Sounds like a teenager.
Yeah, it really is. And often we have people where conflicts are showing up in the workplace. It's when we have somebody who's really driven by a social format or preference, coming into confrontation with somebody who's more task focused. And so there's a bunch of assumptions being made about each person on the team and each person in the leadership role. So the way you construct a conversation, if you're task driven, is that bullet point, blunt, straightforward, kind of really specific. These are the outcomes that I need to get. These are the objectives I'm after. This is the problem. And somebody who's more social is saying, hey, couldn't you ask me how I am? Wouldn't it be nice if you just checked in to make sure I'm okay? And so they start to feel a sense of being offended because they're constantly being affronted by this task, taskmaster or outcome-driven personality.
And what happens, Faith, if you kind of get those inverted or you get that wrong?
Do you know, when you get it wrong, conflict is going to be a part of your equation. There's just no way around it. If you get it wrong, human beings are very predictable in the fact that they will absolutely let you know that you got it wrong. And this is the place where I think a lot of people are afraid to say, hey, can we try that again? I think you took that the way I never intended it to be. So how about if we back up, play the old, Hollywood movie reel of take 2 or take 10, as the case may be. Human beings are very forgiving. And if we just admit that we're learning or we're trying or we're making an attempt, people are pretty forgiving if you're honest, if you're transparent, if you're compassionate, you're really coming forward with the right intention. And we just need to ask for forgiveness when they receive it in a way that wasn't part of what we intended.
I really, really like what you just said about asking for things, because I think that sense of involvement is probably at the heart and soul of so much of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of times, leaders think they need to know all the answers. We need to be right. We need to be clear. We need clarity. But we've heard all the quotes. That the only illusion is that communication actually occurred. So we need to remember that the listener is the only person who can decide if your communication was clear.
You're exactly right. One of the things that I commonly say to my clients about public speaking in general is understand that you are not trying to persuade yourself. You need the audience to do that, but for their own reasons, not for yours. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, I like that. So obviously, you have sometimes you'll have situations where the conflict has occurred, but oftentimes perhaps you're also in a situation where an ounce of preventative action could really do a power of good. If you had thoughts or advice on that, what would they be?
I often say that influencing with an ethical, persuasive, kind of constructive communication is about really following 3 A's. The first is get their attention, and not just theirs, make sure they have yours. So when we're rushing about, when we're impatient, when we're trying to get things off the list, this is when things go awry. If something has happened and you need to come back in, step back in and own your part of it, that personal accountability is really drifting away these days. But if you stand still and say, wow, I'm pretty certain that you took that the way I never intended it to. And it even sounded better when it was rehearsed in my head. I always say, try some humor. Humor first will always start to kind of de-escalate a conflict, but so will genuine sincerity. And so, you can lean on one of the two and say, my apologies, and Canadians are known for their apologies. But only apologize for the things that you actually could have influenced or controlled, as opposed to trying to apologize for something you had no knowledge of. So it's easy to say, I never anticipated that you might take it that way. And I can certainly see how that has occurred. And let me see if I can reframe it, reposition it in a way where it'll be more palatable. We need to own those spaces. We have to understand where people are coming from before we can, take them where we want them to go.
Yeah, no, absolutely that. Yeah. And you think about that, I suppose that for many folks, this is a new departure for them because maybe they have been more used to simply, here's how I want it done. So you go ahead and get it done. And of course, that's not about influence. That's more about controlling. So when it comes to the skills, the soft skills that folks should really be paying attention to, and you'd love to see them hone, what would you say would be, 2 or 3 things that really help people to get a better connection with and a better response from those they work with?
I I think this comes down to the second A, right, in influence, which is affiliation. Create rapport. Rapport just stands for really all people prefer others who resemble themselves. If we can make an effort for people to understand where we're coming from and get to know people. You know, I often say to somebody, when was the last time you knew anything about your new hire? You know, your 3 personal things that don't relate to their skills on the job. You know, so are we setting a culture? Are we creating a culture where we invite people to be, let's say, controversial with us, where it is welcomed that they can be, let's call it disgruntled, but there's a place to be able to share that we're open. The harder part for people is that they forget their nonverbals are very telling. And so somebody say, well, I'm not offended. And you say, well, you should probably tell your face that. because everything about your presentation is telling me how upset you are by what I've just said. And so when we're looking at reducing conflict in a place, we have to poke her up, as they say. You know, we need to be leaning in, not leaning away. We need to stand more side to side when we have difficult conversations, not face to face. We need to soften the approach. And so I often tell people when I'm teaching a nonverbal communications class is you need to stand just a little offside. Engage the right eye with the right eye so that you're kind of standing on that angle that softens the way your communication is received. Tilting your head, just allowing it to look more curious, allows both your brain to think you're more curious as well, so that your voice doesn't sound so aggressive, so impatient, so offended. There's, you know, change your spine to change your mind, as they say. So, you know, you want to lift those shoulders, get that sternum up so that we have that sense of optimism, euphoria. When I'm teaching law enforcement officers, I tell them, get your thumbs up, for heaven's sakes. Stop keeping them tucked into your duty belt. It looks really aggressive. So if we can kind of shift the way that we're thinking in our mind, in our neurology, all of a sudden we can increase rapport with others just because we're paying attention to how we're delivering a message as much as what is delivered in the message. And I think the how comes first, the what comes second. Yeah. So I need to have a difficult conversation with somebody. I better control what's happening in here and make sure that the gatekeeper from the back of the mind to the lips didn't go on coffee break and fail to return.
I think you're exactly right. People will read the signals and they'll behave accordingly.
Yes, exactly. Respond accordingly, right? So they, you know, if I'm going to have a difficult conversation, sometimes people kind of steel themselves up for it. But we look really aggressive when we do that. So keep your eyes open, keep your shoulders relaxed. You know, often a nice trick that we're learning from neuroscience is pick up the toes of one foot. You know, we teach people who are learning to speak for the first time to control jitters. Get the toes up so that the brain feels endorphins and dopamine, like doing the wave at a football game, right? You know, we bring the energy up because we bring the body up. And if we can follow those principles when we're having communication, conversation challenges, particularly in high-end conflict, if I come across as too steadfast, if I come across as too arrogant, aggressive, firm, then people don't feel invited to be a part of the conversation. They feel attacked. And so if we want to up the engagement factor, we need to ask questions about it, not make assumptions about how they're going to answer. And what I often tell law enforcement officers is stop interrogating them. You know, we need to have an interview or a conversation. How did this happen? What happened? And stay away from the word why. You know, we're often taught that whole, you know, look at the W's and the H. The reality is if we ask a why question, the brain becomes defensive. And so why did this happen? Why weren't you here? Why didn't you lock up? Why? Often will just make the brain of the other person completely self-defend. And that's not really supporting engagement or an opportunity for us to solve a conflict.
That's really, really cool. I like that. And actually, you mentioned, of course, your involvement in the law enforcement side of things. And I know you've had some fascinating experiences there. If we were to sum it up in terms of the most important things that you picked up from your years on the force and dealing with conflict, what would be top of mind?
You know, top of mind would be maintaining your sense of humor. This is not about you. Well, most of the time we worry about how people perceive us or what they're thinking about us. And the reality is, if you understood how little people think about you, you could go through your day pretty effortlessly. You know, we used to have a quote on the board that said, 100 years from now, all new people. No one is going to remember you. Okay. You know, so what are you doing that's memorable? It's how you engage and how you support and how you build relationships. I often talk about a story where I was a new recruit. I just started. We get sent to this domestic complaint, and there's this big fight going on behind the door, and my adrenaline's running, and I'm really nervous, and we've got to put a stop to this fight. And so we sneak across, and I'm standing on one side of the door, and my officer coach is going, on 3, we're going to bang the door. 1, 2, he goes to do 3, and the TV came out the window. And my fist was up, ready to pound the door. And I'm like, oh! Dead silence, bang the door. And the guy on the inside says, what? And I said, TV repairman. They all started laughing. They opened the door, the conflict de-escalated, and we had this moment where we were able then to just have a conversation. But because my officer coach was laughing, his adrenaline was down, my adrenaline, my fear was down, and so were the people on the other side of the door. It just kind of diffused this very angry moment. And I think that we need to remember that there are plenty of opportunities respectfully to keep that kind of high level of curiosity, high level of playfulness at the back of our mind all the time. Another time we pulled this vehicle over and gave him a break, you know, pulled him over for a violation, gave him a break on it. And when he was driving away, he gave us the 1-finger salute.
Oh, no.
And I was really frustrated. I was thinking, oh, like, what are you thinking? But my partner, who was with me at the time, looks, goes, look, we're number 1. And from that moment on, you can never see that gesture in the same kind of defensive way again, because I always hear my partner's voice with that very comical moment of, look, see, we're number 1. And not to be so rattled or so stressed out by somebody else's stressful day. You know, conflict is one of these things that we're always going to have. It really is just a matter of learning to dance with it in a way that we don't take it so deeply personally. Workplace bullying, conflicts in the workplace, conflicts at home. I mean, everyone has Uncle Larry who drinks too much at the Christmas party and then causes all the problems in the family. Well, buffer Uncle Larry. Put him next to somebody who's going to keep him playful and keep his aggression at bay. And if you can find those opportunities, conflict just becomes a game of chess as opposed to a game of snakes and ladders. You know, we're always in trouble when we're playing snakes and ladders because we're looking for winners and losers. But if we're playing chess, we're just looking for strategy. How do I navigate this in a way that produces a measurable outcome for both of us? And if we can kind of see that, then I start to look at the players in conflict as chess pieces. You know, pawns only know 1 move. So once you figure out the move, they become very easy to cope with. Bishops will always exploit the game. So if you give them a gap, they'll take it. You know, and if we could see our conflicts like that, we would stop becoming so attached to them and look at them more as something to be solved together than something to be avoided or frightened of.
Well, listen, Faith, can I thank you? I knew this would be an absolutely awesome conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to chat with me this evening.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show, and I hope it's helpful. Certainly, if people want to chat more with me, they can do that anytime, and visit my website at faithwood.com.
Good. Well, actually, you can indeed find the link for Faith's, her website down below. You'll find it in the blog post here. And thank you again for watching the Reluctant Speakers Club Expert Series. And until the next time, here's to great speaking.